Kids, welcome. It's Professor Thomas. Here we are in the video entitled English in a Blaze. This is going to go through English rules. You should have already watched the movie, done a review, done some ACT practice tests. Now it's time to quickly just review them. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to see a rule, we're going to have an example, and then there's going to be a note. I might suggest what you should write down in here. Definitely on your handout. Definitely try and write something. Let's go ahead and get started. First of all, we have one comma that reminds us of the abandoned boxcar. And in abandoned boxcar, you're going to see that we're going to have an independent clause. There'll be a comma, and then on the other side of the comma, there's going to be a dependent clause. Usually what's right before the comma is going to be a noun, and this dependent clause is going to go ahead and give you a miniature definition of that word. Let's go ahead and take a look at our example. I play the xylophone. That's an independent clause, and you'll notice before the comma here in red, you see that we have that word xylophone, which is a noun. And on the other side is our dependent clause. What's a xylophone? It's a musical instrument in the percussion family. That's a miniature definition of the word that sits right before the comma, as I mentioned before, which is a noun. Go ahead, take a note. On to rule 2, it's 2 commas, Mr. Chung. You're going to have 2 commas here as denoted by the red commas. What's between the 2 commas is extra non-essential information that leads you back to the one word right before the comma here. And this, as we saw before in the 1 comma, is going to be a mini definition of what is before the comma in the first half. Let's take a look. Differential calculus, that's a noun. Then we have a comma splice, the study of rates at which quantities change, comma, is used in many areas of physics. You can go ahead and cross this little mini definition off, and you're going to see that we still have a noun and a verb. The differential calculus is used in many areas of physics. Here's the ghost verb, and the verb is on the other side. Remember, Mr. Chung gives you the noun, a bunch of junk, and then the verb is separated by the comma splice. In the next rule, you see that we have multiple commas. In this particular example, you'll notice there's a comma after Plymouth, there's a comma after Minnesota, and there's a comma after the United States. In Junior Genius, we call this the comma staircase, and what you're going to see is you're going to see that what comes before the comma usually is going to be a noun, and then after the comma will be a miniature definition of what that word is. In this case here, you see it says we have a Genius Combine in Plymouth, comma. Now we're going to define what Plymouth is. What is it? It's a city in Minnesota. Now we give another comma. Then after that comma, we're going to give a mini definition of the word that's right before the second comma. In this case, it's Minnesota. Minnesota is also a noun. See the consistency? We go to the next comma here, and this clause says a state in the northern part of the United States. And what is that? That's a definition of Minnesota. And now we have a comma, a subsector of the continent of North America. What is this? This is a miniature definition of what the United States is. By the way, take a look. United States, that is also a noun. Look at the consistency, kids. You're going to see that what we have here is we have 1 comma, 2 commas, 3 commas. You're going to see that what comes after the comma is going to be like a miniature definition of the word right before. And most of the time, not always, but most of the time, more often than not, the word before the comma is going to need a definition because it's a noun. If you just think about it logically, there are probably more nouns in the world than there are verbs. Verbs are actions and pretty straightforward, don't really need definitions. So that's why we have a tendency to use a comma and then define the noun right before it. Fanboys is the next rule. In this particular rule, you remember the movie Hypnotizing the Chupacabra, where it's chasing the crazy little monsters through the jungle. So what do we have for fanboys? Think of fanboys as an exception to the abandoned boxcar. So abandoned boxcar tells us that always when we see 1 comma, we're going to have an independent and a dependent. It could be independent, dependent, or it could be vice versa. All right. In this particular case, you're going to see that we have 1 comma. However, you're going to have an independent clause on both sides. It's going to be connected with our fanboys, which will be designated in this box. All right, so it's 2 independent clauses, and think of the fanboys as glue. All right, so if you look over here, I go to the zoo twice a year. That's an independent clause. We have a fanboys. Fanboys, quick review. F-A-N-B-O-Y-S, for and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. You see in this case we use the word for. Then you see we have another independent clause. I love to see the Tigers play outside. Fanboys, two independent clauses connected by one comma and a fanboys right after that comma. The next rule, comma fence. Commas are like fences, separates stuff off in a list or in words that are descriptively listed off. Comma fence, remember, just listing stuff off. Could be nouns or it could be adjectives or it could be verbs. Just remember, commas are like fences. All right, here's our first example. It's black, comma, blue. In this example, you see that we have how many colors, kids? Black, comma, and blue. That's two. When there's a comma in there, you see it's a fence. It separates the stuff off. In the next example, it says black, blue. That means that they're together. So in this case, this is one color. It's black with a tinge of blue. Remember, commas are like fences. You have to ask yourself which is going to be on which side. Are they going together or are they completely separated? Let's go ahead and take a look at our example so you can see an illustration of how you'll see this on the test. There are many offices in the U.S. legislative branch. All right, so we have legislative branch here. Then it says the U.S. Senate, there's a comma. So the U.S. Senate and the legislative branch are two different things. That's why you separate them by a fence. Then here's the tricky part. It says the U.S. Botanic Garden. All right, the U.S. Botanic Garden is one thing. All right, then there's a comma here and it says the Office of Compliance. That's four. The word and here acts as our fence. It says the U.S. House of Representatives. So in this particular case, we have five things that are listed off. Now, let's go back over here and assume in one of the ACT questions that maybe they have this comma removed here. Okay, so there's no comma. And there is a comma here after U.S. Senate. That means that the U.S. Botanic Garden Office of Compliance. You see how that kind of feels like it potentially could go together? Read it one more time. The U.S. Botanic Garden Office of Compliance. You see how it's, that's a whole name. In this particular case, you're going to see that the comma fence will clear up any confusion that you have. Just remember, commas are like fences. If you're listing off stuff, make sure that there's a comma between things that are separated. Comma fence. The next rule is the dot dot, kids. Remember, it's from the cosmic double dots. Cosmic double dots or the dot dot looks like a smashed equal sign. What's on the left and what's on the right are going to have to equal each other. The way we can remember the mnemonic for the different types, list, description, and a direct quote is I love DQ. L, list, D, description, and Q is a quote. What you'll see most of the time is going to be an independent, a dot dot, and a dependent. That dependent, similar to what you see with a comma, the dependent will define the word right before the dot dot, just like you saw in a abandoned boxcar. Sometimes, but not always, you're going to see, on rare occasions, you're going to see an independent and a dot dot. Okay, now this presents a teeny bit of confusion we'll talk about in a second. Let's get through the independent, dot dot, and dependent. Here we go. It says Zach likes his classes. Here you see we have classes before the dot dot, and now you see that we list them off. History, physics, pre-calc are the most challenging. If you look at it from the perspective of the abandoned boxcar, grammar in general, you're going to see that when we have an independent clause, that what comes after that is usually going to define the word that's right before the punctuation there. In this case here, you see classes, and classes is our noun. See the similarities? Now, when we come back over here, let's clear the screen. We're going to compare the dot dot when it's two independent clauses to a dot comma. Now, for a dot comma, you're going to see that a dot comma in the next rule is going to be two independent clauses. these two independent clauses are linked together with some type of a close relationship. Think of it this way. The period designates two independents, and the comma designates that close relationship. That's why we put the comma in there below the period or dot comma. Once again, dot comma, two independents that are closely related. Now, in the case presented now, we have two independents separated by a dot dot. So this presents some confusion. Which one is correct? Well, this one has a close association, and this one is going to basically say the same thing. Let's go ahead and take a look at what it says on the one example about harbor porpoise. The harbor porpoise is not a fish. That's an independent clause, okay? We see that we have a dot dot, and now here it says it is a warm-blooded mammal. All right, that's also an independent clause, right? Now, if you look here, it is saying the exact same thing. It represents the harbor porpoise. These are closely associated. There's an association. I like red. Zach likes blue. Red and blue are two closely related things, but they're not the same thing. Here in this case, you see that we have a harbor porpoise and we have it, which is the exact same thing. Now, if we come back to the definition, we see that we have a list, a description, and a direct quote. Well, obviously, there's no quotation marks here in the second example, so that's not it. And here you see that we're not listing anything off about the harbor porpoise, but there it is. It's a description of what a harbor porpoise is, or like we saw earlier, almost a mini definition. There you have it, kids. It's the dot dot. Next rule, it's the dot comma. The dot comma is two independent clauses separated by a dot comma. So if you look here, why this is actually put together here, a period tells you that there's going to be two independents, and the comma, think of it as like a hook that's going to link them together. That means they're closely related or associated. All right, now let's compare that to a period or a dot. All right, say we have a period here. Of course, you know that we're going to have two independents on both sides. However, there's no relationship that's needed. All right. Sammy went to the moon. Jimmy has a red shirt on. All right, they both have a subject and a verb, and they're both independent clauses. I just use a period here. All right, now, when do we use a dot comma? Like I said before, it's a close association. In this particular example here, it says, my brother is an engineer. My sister is a professor. So I got brother and sister who are relatives, so they're closely related. I like black, Jimmy likes blue. Black and blue are closely related, so you'd use a dot comma as opposed to a period. Now keep in mind, kids, both of these can be checked at the same time on your ACT English, because you know that whenever you see a period and you see a dot comma, you know that you have to have two independent clauses on both sides. So that's the first thing that I would check when you look at your answers. Say example, you have answer choice A, B, C, and D. Just look in there. If you see a period and a dot comma, check those two first together. And as soon as you see that the first part's a dependent clause or something like that, you could actually cross two out at the same time. Dot comma. Number one rule on ACT mechanics and usage, dun dun dun, it's the razor blade technique, kids. What is the razor blade? Razor blade says we like simple, short answer choices. We check the word delete that answer choice, check it first because you could save some time, and then make sure that there's no redundancy. That means no redundancy in the underlying portion. You're not going to use words that say the same thing, like I like hot chocolate, that is, you know, tasty and delicious. You don't need to be redundant. Also, there could be the sentence, and then there could be the underline. In the underlined sentence, there could be a synonym for something that's already stated in the non-underlined. So just make sure that whatever you put in the underlined answer choice, it's not being said before. It's not redundant. All right. Now, one last thing I would like to talk about this rule, because it is important, is this: that when you use the razor blade is used for short answer choices that are called mechanics All right, mechanics and usage problems. Those questions don't have a question, they just have answer choices. So if you look in, the questions are really short. It just gives you the answers. For example, it's going to give you like A, B, C, and D. There's nothing at the top that says suppose the author. It's just answer choices. So when you see something like this, be thinking razor blade. All right, now real quick over here, if you see a question that's got what's called a question stem, and then you've got your answer choices below. This is a rhetorical skills question, and you do not use the razor blade on those problems. You use what we call the anti-razor blade. That's a Formula B type of a question. That means you want to build up the noun and the verb and make the answer choice longer and more descriptive. Keep in mind, razor blade for mechanics and usage kids, short is best. Cranes Island kids, we're going to isolate structural clue words away from other clauses by putting them in between two commas. Let's take a look at our example. I like to travel, that's our independent clause. You're going to see that after that clause we have a comma. For instance, is our structural clue word, or Cranes Island, and then you see another comma. And then it says, I like expeditions to exotic islands. That's our other independent clause. All right. You'll notice that for instance is not connected to this clause, and it's not connected to this clause. It's independent. It's doing its own thing in the middle of the ocean. It's isolated. It looks like a little island. That's why we call it Cranes Island. Let's take a look at some specific words that you'll use for Cranes Island. Although will be separated by commas on Cranes Island, therefore, for example, however, moreover, nevertheless, and in conclusion. These are not all the words. These are the majority of the ones that are the most common. So keep in mind there may be others. One thing I would like to point out here is if you look on this particular example, you're going to see that we have a period before the word however. In school, that would not be allowed. Your teachers tell you don't start a sentence with the word however. On ACT, you can do that. And in fact, this would be the better answer choice. So here we assume since there's a period, that means what's before that has to be an independent clause. All right, then we would start the word or clause with the word however, then put a Cranes Island, so it's isolated. You're still isolating the word however. Instead of putting two commas, you're going to put a period and a comma. Now, let's go ahead and explain it just a teeny bit further, all right? Here's option one, a period and a comma, and option two, two commas. If we assume that there's an independent clause before the period, that means that we have an independent clause, a period, and then now you're going to have probably some type of a abandoned boxcar or Mr. Chung or comma staircase. Somehow there's going to be, going forward, another independent clause. So thus, we have two independent clauses separated by a period. You with me? Over here, if we have an independent clause, a comma, and another independent clause, that's called a run-on sentence. See why a period here would be the better choice. Remember, if you have the option of putting a period and then a comma on one of these words, that would be the better choice if there are two independent clauses on each side. Kids, Cranes Island isolates structural clue words away from the other clauses by simply throwing them between two commas. Rare occasions you may see this example here. So if you see two options of the same word, a period and a comma, double check. Cranes Island. The Hazy Rule, kids, from the movie Footsteps to Martin Hayes Tower. We want to do is make sure that when we're writing sentences, we're as specific as possible. All right. So be specific. Words like hazy pronouns, like you're going to see here, it, these, them, those, and that are not specific enough. Hey, it made me mad. Whoa, 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 professor, what made you mad? Oh, it was it. You don't really know what the heck it is. It's a hazy pronoun. Now, when you put this together with the razor blade rule, remember razor blade rule says simple is best. And now hazy says that we want to make sure that we know what we're talking about. when you put these two rules together, this is what you come up with. All right, you get short but not hazy. So some occasions the correct answer is actually going to be the longest answer choice because the other answer choices are hazy. Now remember, if you're fighting razor blade versus hazy, hazy pronouns are going to win. That's the more important rule. You want to go as short as possible, but just make sure that you know what you're talking about. Let me give you an example. If I say Susie and Kim are running, comma, she slipped on a rock. All right, so I've got Susie and I've got Kim. And then now I say she. So you don't really see how the word she is really hazy. It's short, but it's not specific enough because we were just talking about something that dealt with two people. All right, make sure you understand hazy pronouns, words that are not specific enough. And when you combine that with the razor blade rule, you want to be as short as possible, but make sure that when you choose that super short answer choice, it's not hazy. Kids, hazy.